Welcome to the Rude Dog Show. This is Rudy Reyes on the Two Live Stews Radio Network. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I've had some great opportunities to speak to some of the legends in the sports world. Tomorrow is no exception to that rules. I'll be interviewing Rod Woodson, who is now the defensive back coach with the Oakland Raiders. But today we have something a little bit different, something that I feel needed to be talked about. A gentleman who comes onto the show with me relatively sooner than later. Is on a different time zone than I. But as you would suspect or would have otherwise known, you need heart to play in any given sport. You need desire. You need passion. You need persistence, perseverance. Not only to be a contender, but to be able to explode onto the next scene in whatever sport you happen to be in. If you're an NCAA student athlete, you're trying to get to the next level.
Are you?
If you're had a disconnection problem there. I'm almost done the intro. Anyway, welcome to the show.
It may have been Kim Jong-il. You know, he might not have liked the dialogue about him or something.
I don't know. He pulled the plug, but welcome the effervescent, the one, the only, a trendsetter in today's WWE. Welcome Bruce Hart, who is not only the catalyst which helped others achieve greatness throughout his career, but served the wrestling community very well and still does to this very day. His mentorship and involvement in what we know now as a widely watched World Wrestling Entertainment Organization, and he's been a part of many others. Welcome to the show, Bruce. How are you? Thank you for taking your time out to join me.
I'm doing good, Rudy. Thanks for the nice introduction. It's great to be on. I've been a while since I've been down in SoCal. I'm familiar turf.
Yeah, no, it is. And because you were in the World Wrestling, at least then the World Wrestling Federation had to change their name because there was a conflict with the World Wildlife Foundation. I don't know how that worked out, from fish to wrestlers and spandex. I don't know how that worked out, but you're familiar with the area.
I'm a horse of a dilemma or something like that, as to use a World Wildlife pun or whatever. But yeah, I was still... Hearts was still involved interactively with Vinnie Mac and the WWE or whatever. I'm not a huge, I don't advocate or endorse everything they do, but, to their credit, they still seem to be sustaining fan interest and getting bigger. And I'm not necessarily better, but they still seem to be doing something right, so that's good.
Well, you've always called it like you've seen it, Bruce. And since you decided to go there, I'm going to follow suit. What is it about the WWE that you do not like, that you wish they would change?
I think they need to be a little bit more wrestling. They use the word WWE and World Wrestling Entertainment. I think they need to be not losing sight of the fact that wrestling is still the main course, and they deviate and compromise it with a lot of illicit non-wrestling stuff that almost kind of makes it and invites derision and ridicule from people. So I think they just need to be a little more middle of the road, to use a kind of a cliche.
So you think commercialization is way overdone in the WWE? You think they could tone that down to make it appear to be less of a drama-ridden show and put more realism involved with the wrestlers that are playing in that federation or the entertainment industry there at WWE?
I think it's all cause and effect. There's not as many good wrestlers in there. Nowhere near as many as there used to be back in the day. So as a consequence, they have to go overboard on the soap opera, the contrived storylines, and the, for want of a better term, the tits and ass and all that kind of stuff, And, it's a tribute or a testimony to the inherent popularity of wrestling, that it's doing as well and has done as well as it has, given how many times they've shot themselves in the foot with kind of bad storylines and, you know, ill-conceived concepts. But I still think they could do a lot better, you know. I think they at some point need to re-sow the seeds at the grassroots. That's one of their biggest problems right now is there's not that many really good up-and-coming wrestlers, you know, and that's due to the fact that back in the day there used to be about 30 promotions out there, and they were where all the talent was coming from. Be the equivalent of Major League Baseball maybe 20 years ago having seen fit to get rid of minor league baseball, and at some point, you know, there would be no really good up-and-coming players getting to the majors. So as a consequence, they'd have to, you know, go overboard on gimmicks and, you know, San Diego Chickens and Morgana the Kissing Bandit and crap like that, you know. That's kind of what wrestling's kind of seen, but I think boxing had the same, you know, boxing kind of grassroots died, and I think the UFC is a good kind of example. You know, I think I attribute a lot of their popularity, you know, to the fact that a lot of traditional wrestling fans were just disgruntled with all the BS and all the non-wrestling stuff and the disclosure about it being entertainment, not a sport, and all that other kind of thing. And that kind of paved the way for Dana White and all like that. And in my estimation, UFC's not 100% on the level either, but, you know, to their credit, they haven't deviated. You don't have guys jumping off the top of the cage or people running into the cage or, you know, all that kind of illicit stuff, you know. But I think WWE, for want of a better term, needs to get back to the middle of the road. But I'm not sure if they're capable of that because, as I said before, there's not that much really competent wrestling talent coming in. They probably tell you that's not true, but there's only a few guys that I consider like in the category of a Bret Hart or a Ric Flair or Terry Funk coming up today. So because of that, they got to go overboard on Punjabi cage match, death matches, and ladder matches every night, and hardcore, and brawling out into the crowd and just destroying the timekeeper's table every match and that kind of thing. But hopefully they'll see fit to, you know, get back to some semblance of conventionality, if only because it might be necessary for them to, you know, sustain themselves in the long course.
Well, it's something that they've sustained for decades, at least. WWE with Steve McMahon, and then you have his daughter, Stephanie, got involved in the process. And wrestling for them started as an inception. The whole thought process behind this is something that was a brainchild of her dad. But for you, wrestling started from near inception, as your dad was a widely known promoter for Stampede Wrestling. Of course, everybody should know the famous, or the infamous, more likely, Stu Hart. But what was it about having a dad who was very influential in your decision to start training in his basement for wrestling?
Yeah, it was a different mindset. I would say my dad and Vince McMahon Jr. were polar opposites. My dad was a big proponent of old school amateur. My dad had come up back in the 1930s and cauliflower era, and you had to pay your dues, and it was essentially kind of enhanced amateur wrestling. My dad told me when he was breaking in, it was not much different than you know, UFC used to be, with guys, you know, not doing too many spectacular, what we call high spots or anything like that. It was essentially grappling, and most of the guys in there were these cauliflower-eared kind of hard asses who, you know, were pretty scary. And and as such, the fans kind of, they kind of respected them for that, I give credit to Hulk Hogan and those guys that were kind of at the outset of the WWE. It was kind of some pretty pronounced showbiz aspects, but they were still pretty much wrestlers. But I think WWE during the so-called Attitude Era and some of that got off track. And my dad used to say they got so far out that they couldn't get back in. And the weird thing about it is, though, the last 20 years or so, with the explosion of social media and all these other things that are incredible propaganda mediums, wrestling should have enjoyed a far bigger growth, given the fact that around the world, wrestling's sort of a pretty easy sell. Like maybe, it's hard to sell ice hockey in Thailand or something like that, or pro football in Russia or something like that. But wrestling's pretty kind of primal. So I think it should have been enjoying far better expansion and growth. But in part, it's because they've gotten too far in the gimmicks. And I think just now they're starting to incorporate some internationalism. They got a guy who's actually from Calgary, but they bill him from Pakistan or India, a guy named Jinder Mahal, who's their champion now. So I think they're endeavoring to expand a bit, but in my estimation, they could and should be doing it a lot better. There's a lot better ways to incorporate internationalism, which, that playing on all these kind of ethnic and nationalistic rivalries. There's all kinds of stuff out there. If you had Russians and Chinese and maybe some guys from, some of those so-called terrorist countries and stuff like that. That always used to be what wrestling seemed to embody back in the day. When I was a kid, they always had the post-World War II, they had the Nazis and the Japanese, and then during the Cold War era, the Russians, and later on the Iron Sheik and that kind of thing. That stuff's all fairly easy to propagate or incorporate.
Well, is that something you think the WWE really needs to go back to? You're talking about grassroots and how the growth of the audience is more so now because their image has changed, and image is everything, and that's something that the McMahons have always prided themselves on. When I was growing up, I didn't recall a WWE. It was just a federation. You had mentioned Hulk Hogan, you had Andre the Giant, you had the Warrior, you had Hacksaw Jim Duggan, you had a plethora of guys. You talk about Ric Flair, and these guys made grand entrances. Now you look at a lot of the new guys today, even just not really as explosive. I mean, you could probably go to Stone Cold Steve Austin day as well, and maybe even The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, when you look at what they brought to the sport, what they did more so for the sport. Does WWE have to step backwards to really look at the bigger picture and to come up with better production angles in order to get these fights to be much more that of what you would see in a UFC arena?
Yeah, I think they need to cut back on the artificial additives and all the superficial elements, and actually go back to more wrestling. But the problem is they don't have that many guys that can wrestle. They got guys like The Miz and people like that who, to use a cliche, don't know a wristwatch from a wristwatch, and they, because they can't wrestle, they have to do all the non-wrestling stuff for talking, and a lot of the people that are running it, in my estimation, know very little about wrestling. If they did, they'd be doing a lot more wrestling, and there would be a lot less of these kind of, extreme type aspects, with chairs and ladders and, guys hitting each other in the head with sticks and divas being on the card every night and all this kind of stuff. In the old days, that used to be the exception rather than the rule. And these days, if you go to a WWE show, it's almost kind of routine to have 3 or 4 what we used to call sport finishes, where somebody gets disqualified or somebody gets counted out, or 4 guys hit the ring and beat the hell out of 1 guy and that kind of thing. But it's all reflective of the fact that there's not that many Ric Flairs or Dory Funk Jr.'s or Luthez types out there, so they have to kind of compromise it with all those other non-wrestling aspects. But I think at some point they need to, I think at times maybe they are going that way. I just came back from Iowa, where I was down at this Dan Gable Hall of Fame Museum in Waterloo, Iowa. And Dan Gable, as most of the listeners might know, was kind of like the greatest amateur wrestler maybe of all time, an Olympic icon. And I saw, some of the WWE people down there, and in talking to them, I got the impression that they're maybe striving to get back to, some semblance of kind of quasi-conventionality, with amateur wrestling being kind of the foundation. But it takes a while. We can't turn out guys like Ric Flair and my brother Brett and people like that overnight. Just like you can't turn out an awesome football quarterback in one day or anything like that. So I think they need to strive to go more in that direction and cut back on a lot of the illicit stuff. But easier said than done. They've kind of they've created a bit of a monster in the even the fan base. I think a lot of conventional fans, as I said before, have kind of quit watching, and they're probably watching UFC now. And a lot of them, you see them at the matches all the time. They're always going holy shit and all that kind of stuff, and it's kind of tail wagging the dog if you're catering just to those people, because it's not really wrestling. It's almost like some kind of extremism, and they're almost wanting to see somebody come off the top of a cage and splatter their guts on the pavement, that kind of stuff, which is not really wrestling though.
Well, you were talking about Brett, and I had asked you before if there was anything that was off the table with you. So I want to make sure that we're on the same page here. And I remember watching your brother, of course, a wide array of children, 12 total, in fact, for the Hart family. And I remember your brother, and I thought to myself, wow, this has got to be probably one of the most dynamic guys you'll find in a WWF, at least then, arena. And it's not something that I usually talk about or bring up, but what was it about no longer having your brother to mentor, to train, to just be around, to watch him grow into a sport that he loved?
Well, I was actually one of the integral. I was already the booker running the show for my dad up here around the time when Brett and a bunch of those other young guys were just launching their careers, Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith and my other brother Owen and Chris Benoit and Brian Pillman and people like that. And so I gained a lot of intrinsic satisfaction in just seeing them, kind of rise to, high levels, and a lot of their success I attribute to my dad, who was old school and kind of was a big proponent of, amateur-based wrestling, and he used to have all these little things. He'd say, whatever you do it for a reason. Remember that wrestling is always the the foundation of the main course and everything else should relate to that. So you're not, letting the extremism or the color of your hair or the, artificial gimmick that you're endeavoring to incorporate kind of be the main thing. And I think those all were reasons why Brett and those other guys had a lot of success. I remember when those guys were starting, though, WWE tended to be kind of almost a little bit cynical or, kind of downplaying, like you guys are too conventional, you're not outlandish or outrageous enough to succeed in the WWE, which at that time was almost kind of like a bit of a cartoon with Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant and a lot of those bushwhackers and that kind of thing. I think Brett and them, they added an element of quasi-legitimacy to it, and I think it was good for business when they started finally pushing Brett and guys like that. Like Brett was there probably for 5-6 years before they ever seemed to recognize he was above, working in the opening matches, and then they finally said, geez, maybe this is a direction to go. And I think they probably need to return to that kind of foundation. It's hard to say whether they will or not, though.
Well, no, you're right. It is really hard because you said all the gimmicks, all the underlying issues that keep the WWE from becoming what they were founded to begin with. I believe they're just a shell of themselves. I really do. You're talking about the Divas. I was at the ESPYs a few weeks ago, and I seen the Divas. Now, I have nothing against anybody in the WWE, but when you're talking about gimmicks, they certainly are a gimmick. I'll be honest with you, and I'm sure they have skill sets to some degree. They've been doing this for a while, so it's not as if they're solely relying on their looks. But if you want to put a percentage out there, I think it's more 80-20 than anything else. You were talking about your brother.
Davis even.
Yeah, you're right. Yep, exactly. You're talking about your brother and what it was like to not have him. But what was it like working with him? Did you find it difficult to put the instruction down? I mean, was there anything at all? What kind of pitfalls that were starting to take shape during that process?
It was actually easy, back in the day, we used to let the wrestlers pretty much, it was assumed or a given that they all were pretty good workers, as they say. They all knew how to engage the crowd and work with each other and build to a climax. And there was very little of this scripting, which is kind of one of the things that I think is a big problem with WWE, where it's so damn scripted move for move that it almost sterilizes and takes the crowd out of it. Big part of it back in the day was, you interact with the audience and endeavor to kind of let them intrinsically feel like their input, their cheering or their booing or reacting had a bearing on the outcome. And that kind of, that was what the hallmark of all the really good workers back in the day was, this, latent ability to make the crowd feel like they were, kind of the wind beneath your wings type thing. But all too often the WWE these days, it seems to be so damn choreographed that it makes the crowd almost feel like their input has no bearing on the outcome, which is the antithesis of what any kind of entertainment should be about. If you went to a Rolling Stones concert, even if they're singing Jumping Jack Flash for the millionth time, they still have this ability to make the crowd think that they're, inspiring them to sing it better than they've ever sung it before type thing. And that's another element that WWE needs to, I think, let the wrestlers go out and ad-lib a lot more. But part of the problem is a lot of them are not capable of ad-libbing because they're not that actually talented. You know, they're kind of one-trick ponies who have to kind of, you know, still have the training wheels to use, no matter if they're still on you. They're not capable of freewheeling or going out and just doing it on their own. So those are all things that I think detract or compromise what wrestling is today, and I think they're things that need to be not lost sight of, though.
I agree with you. I look at the WWE and think to myself, man, what happened to the good days? What happened to the good times? What happened when wrestling was really wrestling? You seen the Honky Tonk Man taking on Jake the Snake Roberts. There were so many different aspects to the WWF at that time that were so dynamic, that engaged people. You were talking about audiences and how audiences helped determine the outcome because they were engaged. The ownership was given to the people there in order to make the determination as to whether or not they liked the guy or didn't like the gal, or did like the guy and did like the gal and wanted to see them team up. So you would see more creative producing from the WWE nowadays versus WWF was a lot more off the cuff, because you've seen guys like Hulk Hogan. He'll walk in and say, "Hey, brother," you know, that's his thing. And he pulls the microphone and he starts blasting somebody. He gets in the ring and starts destroying people, because that's just who Hulk Hogan is. Those types of impromptu things, I believe, if not realized by the WWE, will ultimately be their downfall because of lack of creativity that showcases more wrestling. I completely agree with you there, Bruce. I completely agree. This is Rudy Reyes on the Rude Dog Show on 2 Live Stews Radio Network with the infamous, timely Bruce Hart, who joins me for the other 30 minutes left in the show today. I look at the old schoolers. I had mentioned Andre the Giant, of course, one of the most infamous, tall, big guys who was, I would say, Hulk Hogan's nemesis. If you really wanted to put pencil to paper, that's who he was. And when I heard of his passing in 1993, I thought to myself, not only was this a guy, a giant amongst men, but he was also someone who contributed so much to the game in its heyday. When you look back at Andre the Giant's meaning, what type of work relationship did you have with him, and what were you doing when the news broke regarding his passing in 1993?
I had a long friendship with Andre going back to the 1970s. You know, he used to come up here back in the day. He'd come up here for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and kind of like he was like a special attraction. He was a really great guy and a really good ambassador for the business, you know, and really nice guy, Andre, you know, as long as he didn't treat him like he was a freak or something like that, he treated you great. But it was almost ironic that these days Andre is almost kind of remembered more as a heel, because he had that kind of infamous run with Hulk Hogan where Hulk was at the height of his popularity at that time as the All-American good guy or whatever, and Andre kind of played the insidious villain for a while, which is kind of a stretch for him because he's such a nice guy. But I was happy to see Andre have that one kind of run where he was actually taken seriously. Most of the time, Andre was more or less considered like the midgets or the girls or whatever, sort of a novelty act, and not that taken not that seriously as a, you know, kind of an actual wrestler. But it was kind of nice to see that thing in I think it was Pontiac Silverdome, and Andre and Hogan WrestleMania 3, and so that was kind of cool, and I was glad it kind of vindicated Andre in a lot of people's eyes. It's not just sort of a, you know, a cartoonish circus act, but actually kind of a serious wrestler. So it was sad when I heard about his passing, you know, although, you know, he had been in poor health the last few years of his life, just, I guess, with the condition that he had, you know, so it's still sad, though, you know, and I've seen a few of these other guys, Big Show and a few of the others, but none of them have really kind of risen to that level.
You're right. Andre the Giant will always go down as a guy you love to hate. And I think the reason behind that was it was his demeanor. He wasn't this, at least from my perspective, watching him on TV against Hulk Hogan or any other time with his backstage and that's where it really started getting people engaged when they would go backstage and have these conversations with, the announcers or the play-by-play, if you will, guys for the broadcast crew there at the WWF at the time. And I look at Andre the Giant and think to myself, man, this guy meant so much to so many people, and it's sad to see that he's gone. What personal toll did it take on you trying to recover and really wrap your head around the fact that he was actually gone?
I was kind of sad because I'd known him for about 20 years, and traveled many long trip with him, and I was fortunate enough to, get to know him and share perspectives about non-wrestling things, and sort of enhanced my perception of him just being a really decent person, so I'd like to see. I've never seen anyone close to Andre since either. I mentioned before Big Show and Greg Kelly and some of them, and most of them unfortunately pale by comparison. They just didn't have that it factor or whatever, but there's still some guys even today though that I think get it and have that it factor, even one of the more recent ones that I thought really captured the people's imaginations was almost like the polar opposite of Andre. The guy who was about 5'5" and about 180 pounds, Daniel Bryan, and he was kind of almost the polar opposite of Andre, but he understood how to relate to the crowd and make them relate to him. And it was too bad he I think badly injured his neck and he had to retire prematurely. And they haven't really replaced him either yet, but you figure WWE would be kind of making notes and seeing, a guy like Hulk Hogan or a guy like Andre or Daniel Bryan or even my brother Brett, at the very least using them as kind of prototypes to maybe develop some new talent and, instill some of those pointers in some of the guys coming up. All too often I see guys coming up today that are doing everything but getting it, so to speak. They have all the look and they got the costume and they got the catchphrases and all the other stuff, but they don't seem to quite understand how to wrestle or how to react and relate to the crowd and make them relate to them. And those are some of the things that are really the intangibles that separate the run-of-the-mill guys from the iconic guys. And it's probably like that in other sports too, I would think.
No, it definitely is. I look at Andre the Giant, and he's missed. You were talking about the Big Show. I don't think they've quite found a way. And for me to say they would find a way to replace him would be very understated, because you can't replace a guy like Andre the Giant. It just doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long, long time to find somebody who's original enough to really come into the ring to make an impact. Now, when I look at up-and-coming wrestlers, and I know we are talking about the past greats of the WWF, now some of them, even the Hardy Boys of WWE, and you have the Divas and guys and gals just like them. But when you look at the up-and-coming, is there any way that you believe in the next 5 to 10 years that the WWE will really create a farm system for up-and-comers to really help develop them and maybe bring back some of the older guys like Jake the Snake or Hacksaw Jim Duggan or maybe Chris Benoit to come back to kind of help mold these guys into who they believe they could be and to replenish? And in other words, what they would have to do is start almost from scratch, Bruce, in relation to reintroducing it's not trying to recreate the wheel, it's making it spin that much better. Do you see the WWE even remotely doing something like that in the future?
I think so. If such is going to happen, I think the people in WWE themselves need to change their approach before any of those other things. And one of the problems I see in WWE these days is there's way too many cooks in the kitchen. They got all these non-wrestling yes men in Titan Tower or whatever down in Connecticut. My dad used to refer to them as eunuchs in the whorehouse. They know all about it, but they've never done it. You know, they're the guys concocting the storylines and telling people what they're going to do and what character they're going to play. And there's way too much of that. You know, and as I said before, I think they need to re-sow the seeds at the grassroots with, you know, having some regional promotions and actually having guys learn how to, you know, work as they say, and where they're actually interacting and going out and sustaining a crowd without any props or any artificial additives. And there's a lot of those things that I think need to happen. But the good thing is, you know, there's a huge global market out there that's at their disposal, and maybe because of the social media and the internet and all like that, if you're able to kind of, you know, get in on the ground floor in places like China and India and, you know, Africa and South America and stuff like that, there's incredible potential, but they have to kind of go about it the conventional way, almost go back 100 years and reestablish wrestling and anything else complement it, not kind of, you know, be the main focal point, which is one of their biggest problems in the last 20 years, is they've gone overboard on the so-called entertainment element rather than the athletic element. And, you know, it's caused a lot of the conventional fans to, you know, cease watching, or they've opted to go to UFC or, you know, other forms of combative sport entertainment or whatever.
Yeah, no, you're right. The UFC is certainly the go-to sport. At least I can speak for myself on that, because UFC is so more entertaining. It's true to form. I would say if there was some type of gauge to determine whether or not the fights going on in the UFC were fake, I'd say maybe 5%, if that. Why? Because these guys are showing true grappling. They're showing, you know, a 5-time NCAA champion wrestlers. They're showing, you know, very acrobatic and athletic guys and gals, which helps me ask this question. And I've mentioned this before on the show, talking about female sports and how now the women are really a part of the UFC. I had spoken to Patricia Summerlin, and you know her very well. And I had asked her what her thoughts were about women getting into the UFC, becoming more of a dominant figure within that sport. I'm going to ask you the same question. Where do you feel women, whether it be the WWE or even in the UFC, that women would be a viable cog to help sell these audiences? And I don't mean just based on the physicality in the WWE, because you see the UFC. You see how grungy they come in with their hair tied back, and, you know, they're ready to go with the mouthpiece in their mouth, so on and so forth. Could the WWE really pull watchers back in, making that type of movement within their organization? I think we may have lost Bruce there, unfortunately. We'll get him back on the line here in just a moment. Bruce, are you back with us? Okay, Bruce, we lost you. That's okay. I was asking you, because I had Patricia Summerlin here on the Rude Dog Show, but we were talking about women and how they've been, you know, they started with the Glow Girls, and I had asked Patricia this very same thing. What back in to get listeners, more viewers, more people involved, if women just came in there straight grungy with mouthpieces and hairs, you know, hair braided back and everything they're in? Could there be an audience for that and room in the WWE for that type of female action?
I think they need to a degree, cut back on the, the sexploitation element of it. They got to the point where it was kind of like glorified strippers. Almost all the divas were, kind of there for aesthetic rather than athletic reasons. And I'm still kind of old school enough to think that women's wrestling should be more of a once in a while novelty type thing rather than every damn card you have women. Back in the day you'd have women maybe come to Stampede Wrestling once or twice a year, and it was kind of a special attraction type thing. But having said that, I think they still need to have the women doing more wrestling and less of the kind of posing and kind of non-wrestling kind of BS or whatever, I'm not sure if that's a possibility. One of the problems they have is they have too many things that are in conflict with each other, where you got, like they still have Brock Lesnar and they're trying to make him out to be a pretty viable, hardcore athletic type thing. And then on the same card, they got women that are doing hardly any wrestling, or they got some of these other people that are almost kind of the antithesis of what Brock Lesnar is, guys like The Miz and them who mostly pose and, who do the, kind of running around the ring and kind of using foreign objects and all that kind of stuff. So I think at some point they need to be a lot more kind of consistent, because the fans aren't sure which way they're supposed to, whether they're supposed to be taking it as a kind of a serious thing, or whether they're supposed to be laughing, or whether it's supposed to be some kind of a poorly written soap opera or what, But it's hard to say. I think, as I said before, there needs to be less cooks in the kitchen, and they have to be a lot more clear in what they're actually seeking to accomplish.
I think they've already designated what they're trying to do, and it's really unfortunate. I look at the WWE and I think to myself, in all fairness, I couldn't even imagine watching. It's just not it's not my thing. There's so many other sports that I could be watching: hockey, football, soccer, baseball, basketball, with the summer league going on right now in the NBA. There's so many different sports, and I don't see any reason. Is there any compelling reason that you could give someone to watch the WWE now?
I think there's still fans out there, but one of the big secrets and one of the big things that used to make fans watch it was this subliminal ability to kind of relate to these. Back in the day, you'd have the good guys, and the fans could relate to the adversity and the trials and tribulations that they were having to go through, and it was all subliminal, but it was what made people get into a Daniel Bryan or some of those guys, but nowadays they've kind of taken that away, which is kind of one less reason to really get into it. It's still sort of a spectacle, and they come maybe once a year to whichever place, Calgary or whatever, but it's still nowhere near maximizing, its potential. And I think they need to be hearing exactly the kind of rhetoric that you were just saying, as far as tuning out, because if they don't, they could go the way of, a lot of other things that everyone thought, were a blockbuster video or whatever. They might find the whole thing is kind of passed them by. Pro boxing has kind of gone that route now. I don't know whether I don't even know if there is pro boxing anymore. And I think they need to be acutely aware of the demise of pro boxing and things like that. seem to be, at the top of the mountain back in the Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier days, and pretty much dead in the water now.
Yeah, I agree with you. Professional boxing is certainly not something that it doesn't really interest me. The whole Pacquiao fight, that was just a joke. In the boxing industry, the boxing world is really a shell of itself. That's the saddest part of all, is that when you're trying to sell something, people are buying into it, then all of a sudden somebody else wins because of the popularity vote. That's not a sport. That's not a sport I want to watch. I want to watch guys competing and gals competing every single second. Matt Page, a connection here on Facebook, he says that, as the saying goes, sex sells, and if they get more money with the female athletes dressing more provocatively, that's what they'll do. And I agree with you 110%. They're going to continue doing this until they're going to bottom out. Everybody bottoms out. Every episode, every show, every series, everything bottoms out at one point. And the only way to realize what happened is at that point too late. When you go back down to the bottom, the basics is where you're really going to find that you have to rise to the top because the cream of the crop does. Everybody else goes by the wayside. And when I look at, you were a wrestler for a numerous amount of years. You've won championships, including the Stampede North American Heavyweight Championship. You participated in the WWF Survivor Series back in the 90s. And you contributed to your dad's promotion there in Calgary of Stampede Wrestling. You were tag teaming with Dan Crawford as well. And there's so many things and I wish I had tons more time. We can go into this backlog for a better part of 2 hours, in fact, but I only have one, unfortunately. But I look at the year 1973. Now, I'm dating myself because in 73, I was born. You were already playing this sport for a better part of 20 years in 1973. But you suffered a serious shoulder, which is a massive setback for any player, especially in the wrestling industry, that sidelines you for nearly 9 months and ultimately almost made you decide to quit altogether. What was it about returning to the sport as you really try to put yourself together emotionally, physically, and mentally that made you want to continue?
Probably just not having accomplished my goals, at that point. But the wrestling business, unlike maybe hockey or whatever, if you got a guy who's playing for, the Dallas Cowboys or something like that, he still gets his salary, whether he, suffers an injury or whatever. But in wrestling, there's no kind of workman's comp or any of that kind of stuff. So you have to keep going. I'm fortunate enough, I've gone to university. I got a couple of degrees and I teach school these days. But that's one of the other big things with pro wrestling is seems to be a feast or famine thing for a lot of the guys that are out there on the smaller independent circuits these days. I think a lot of them are probably starving or having to work 2 or 3 day jobs or something like that. And, so that makes it that much harder, but as far as I was concerned, I think one of the things that sustained me was I became pretty active in the just kind of the behind the scenes aspects, as far as orchestrating matches, storylines, training guys, and all that kind of thing. So that was as much satisfaction for me as just sort of being an integral part in the development of people like my brother Owen and British Bulldogs and Chris Benoit's and guys like that. It gave me a lot of satisfaction just to be kind of on the ground floor when they were getting their careers started and giving them some useful advice that helped them kind of attain stardom later on. So I'd shudder at the thought if I had just been strictly a wrestler type from the get-go, because I probably would have starved or, would have been that much harder for me. And that's one of the prevailing problems with the wrestling business today. It's sort of a feast or famine. If you're WWE, you're probably making pretty good income. But if you're one of these guys working in Indy cards all around the country, you're probably having to hold down another job or live in your father's basement, that kind of thing.
Well, look, everybody has to start somewhere, okay? There are people putting things together in their one-bedroom apartment. You have, creators of all these different empires were committed in some menial fashion. So you look at the wrestling industry, and where you started was there as well, in a basement, and now, here's where you're at. You've traveled to United Kingdom. You wrestled under the name Bronco for the London Joint Promotions. And then on top of that, there was some type of opportunity to wrestle for the Stampede and with a guy named Tom Billington. And because of the fallout there, and he went by the name Dynamite Kid, and he traveled to Canada to join the Stampede. Why do you believe Tom Billington just decided to decline?
Yeah, that was one of the, one of the problems I had when I was breaking in is there was a predomination on big heavyweight type guys. I think I weighed about 180 pounds then and was kind of skinny by wrestling standards. So even though my dad had the promotion here, myself and even my brother Brett at that time, we were considered maybe too skinny to be taken seriously. So I had to go to England, and they had a lot of so-called lightweights and stuff over there. It was a lot like boxing, where you had welterweights and middleweights and that kind of thing. When I was over in England, they had a way more dynamic style, and I had a chance to hook up with Tom Billington, who later became the Dynamite Kid, and his cousin David Smith, who became Davey Boy Smith. They later on became the British Bulldogs, but they were kind of the antithesis of North American wrestlers. Not too much gimmicks and all that kind of thing, but they knew how to wrestle, and you'd see virtually no punching, kicking, or any of that kind of stuff over there. Was almost all kind of just wrestling, and they had a huge influence on my brother Brett and my brother Owen and guys like that later on came out of Stampede and had huge success in WWE in Japan and that kind of thing. One of the other things that I endeavored to do when I was booking up here was I was always bringing in guys from all over the world and trying to incorporate those different styles into our style. Like, we had a lot of Japanese guys, and we had a lot of guys from the southern states, like Honky Tonk Man and David Schultz, and bring guys from all over the world. And it really enhanced the brand of wrestling, And I think that's one of the things WWE needs to be doing more of. I see them once in a while bringing in an English guy like Finn Balor or some of these little Japanese guys, but all too often they make those guys adapt to the style in WWE, and I think it would be better if they actually told those guys to do their thing and tried to incorporate that into the WWE style. It would make for a better brand of wrestling, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen, egocentricity being what it is.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of reasons why the WWE is a shell of itself and basically handing off the popularity. If there was a contest, the UFC would definitely win this because the octangular play, because of the diversity, the types of players, the athleticism involved in what they do and the brand that they're trying to build. UFC is a force to be reckoned with. I don't foresee, even as an entertainment value and again, I'm not bashing the WWE. I'm just stating that there are a lot of people out there that like to watch it. They enjoy that type of over-dramatized situational wrestling, and that's fine. And they can certainly like that. I'm just not a fan of it. I'd rather watch the UFC or some other sport, as I mentioned earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Hart joins me here on the Rude Dog Show, right here on the Two Live Stews Radio Network. Bruce, I want to thank you very much for taking your time out with me this afternoon. I wish I had another hour. We can go at least another round here, literally, talking about your career and all the great things that you're continuing to do. Stating that you're a teacher, and that certainly has its own rewards as well. Something that you've just kind of grown into as far as that role is concerned. Last but not least, what are your thoughts about the teaching that you have been doing, and what else have you been up to nowadays?
I do have my own radio show called Heartbeat Radio, and I usually kind of engage. I've had everyone from Ric Flair to Terry Funk to Ruth Ez's wife on there, and I'm always endeavoring to use that as maybe kind of a means of, kind of keeping some elements of conventional old school wrestling, and maybe keep, hoping that might kind of be a reminder of WWE and all that need not lose sight of what wrestling actually should be. So, but yeah, I always enjoy having an opportunity to come on a show like yours, Rudy, and just kind of discussing those things, and hopefully sowing the seeds of maybe some kind of old school revival, and I think that's one of the biggest things that the wrestling business needs to be concerned with right now, is just kind of, rebuilding its foundation, because it's not very strong, and that could ultimately decimate the future of our business.
I believe so, and you're welcome, and more than happy to have you join me for this hour here on the Rude Dog Show on the Two Live Stews Radio Network. I appreciate your time, and I'll follow that sentiment, and I'll suggest that the WWE themselves, and I'm talking to you, WWE, to really shape up, because you're losing real viewers. I understand the entertainment value, and that's validated through what you've done. But again, with what you've done, you've alienated a lot of people like myself that's being basically wanting to shift to other types of sports, which doesn't constitute me even thinking about watching the WWE at any length whatsoever. So if you change things, that may bring back the old schoolers, create a farm system. You have enough money, you have the resources, you have guys who played with you in the past that would, I'm sure, be more than happy to bring up some up-and-coming talent. I guarantee they know someone. Sometimes when you're in an industry, baseball, football, you know a guy or you know a gal. And sometimes those people, all they need is a shot. And I think that the WWE needs to, instead of shooting itself, give somebody else a shot to help bring back the popularity that was once the WWE. Bruce Hart, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Rudy. Anytime. And I'll do it again another time. We can maybe see where the business is going at that time. Hopefully it'll be going in the right direction.
Hopefully the change will be made. Then you're very welcome. Thanks for coming on. Thank you so much. We will be in touch, Bruce. Thank you.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that was Bruce Hart, a huge business-oriented family. He does the Heartbeat Radio out in Canada. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is Rudy Reyes on the Two Live Stews Radio Network on the Rude Dog Show. You can find this episode along with the video on the rudedogshow.com, and you can find it on YouTube as well. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. This is Rudy Reyes on the Rude Dog Show on the Two Live Stews Radio Network. I'll see you guys tomorrow.